What happens when even America's closest ally decides the US can no longer be trusted? For decades, Washington counted on Canada to buy American fighter jets, fueling industries, protecting jobs, and keeping NATO's military dominance unchallenged. But overnight, that bond was shattered. Ottawa turned its back, rejecting US defense giants in favor of European partners. It wasn't just a contract, it was a warning shot, a signal that America's grip on global power may no longer be guaranteed. But the real shock? This wasn't just about defense. It was retaliation. Retaliation for tariffs that had already pushed Canada to the breaking point. And the fallout stretches far beyond the skies, from Pentagon war rooms to factory floors across Texas and Missouri. The announcement came without warning. Billions of dollars in fighter jet contracts, once considered locked for US manufacturers, were instead awarded to European suppliers. It was the first time in modern memory that America's defense industry had been so publicly sidelined by a core ally. For Ottawa, this wasn't just about planes, it was about independence. The decision meant Canadian pilots would soon fly jets assembled in Montreal, powered by engines from European plants, and packed with electronics sourced from Asia. America, for the first time in decades, was frozen out. This break wasn't symbolic alone, it was historic. For generations, US aerospace giants like Lockheed Martin and Boeing assumed contracts from Canada were inevitable. Suddenly, that certainty was gone. But the question burning in Washington was simple. Why now? The answer, insiders argued, was painfully clear. This was payback. For years, Canadian industries had endured tariffs on steel, aluminum, and aerospace components under Donald Trump's trade wars. Shipments crossing the border were taxed again and again, sparking outrage in Ottawa. When Canada unveiled its decision, the subtext couldn't be ignored. This was retaliation. Washington had dismissed warnings that hardline trade policies would alienate allies. Now, those warnings had come true. This wasn't just a procurement choice, it was a message. Canada had grown tired of volatility and unpredictability, and the cost for America's defense industry would be staggering. But inside the Pentagon, the fallout went deeper than trade politics. For months, officials believed Canadian orders would keep production lines in Fort Worth and St. Louis running for years. Lockheed Martin had factored the contracts into revenue projections. Boeing's defense division had promised stability to workers. Overnight, that illusion collapsed. Plans built on Canadian orders dissolved in a single press conference. Washington's defense establishment was blindsided. The Pentagon wasn't just losing money, it was losing confidence. As one insider admitted, "We expected negotiations, not rejection." But beyond boardrooms and war rooms, the pain was hitting real families. In Fort Worth, where Lockheed Martin's skyline dominates the horizon, workers streamed out of factories in disbelief. For decades, they had built fighters for America and its allies. Now, the orders they had trusted were gone. Local leaders warned of layoffs. Suppliers across Texas braced for shrinking demand. For machinists in St. Louis, tied to Boeing's defense division, the fear was the same. Communities that had depended on aerospace paychecks for generations suddenly faced uncertainty. The impact went beyond balance sheets. Schools reliant on local tax dollars, diners filled with shift workers, and small businesses tied to factory wages. Every part of the community stood in the shadow of the collapse. And the losses didn't stop there. For decades, American fighter jets weren't just hardware. They were symbols of Western power. The F-16, the F-A-18, the F-35. These aircraft weren't only tools of war, they were political instruments. Owning them meant alignment with Washington, trust in US technology, and a place within NATO's circle of power. Canada's break sent a chilling message. American fighters were no longer inevitable. The assumption that allies would always default to US hardware had been shattered. Analysts warned this wasn't simply a contract loss. It was the first fracture in North America's tightly interwoven defense economy. And once a fracture begins, cracks can spread quickly. The world was watching. If Canada could pivot, who might be next? Allies in Europe, already courted by France, Germany, and Sweden, were paying close attention. Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Poland, all major buyers of American jets, were suddenly reconsidering their options. European alternatives like the Eurofighter Typhoon and Sweden's Gripen, once seen as secondary, gained credibility overnight. With Canada, a NATO ally, and U.S. neighbor embracing diversification, the precedent was set. A domino effect loomed, and Washington's grip on global defense markets looked shakier than ever. The numbers were staggering. Analysts estimated tens of billions in potential U.S. losses over the next decade. The aerospace sector, one of America's last reliable export engines, was bleeding. But the damage didn't stop at balance sheets. Fighter jet production pulls from metals, composites, electronics, and rare earths. With Canada's pivot, demand for aluminum, titanium, and high-tech components shifted toward Europe and Asia. Investment dollars, once destined for American plants, began flowing overseas. Even more alarming, this wasn't just about economics, it was about strategy. If America couldn't guarantee allies would buy its jets, how could it guarantee influence? The fallout spread into politics. States most exposed, Texas, Missouri, Michigan, Pennsylvania, were already feeling pressure. These weren't just any states. They were swing states, vital in U.S. elections. Local politicians demanded answers. How had Washington allowed a cornerstone ally to slip away? For the American public, the blow was deeply symbolic. For generations, the U.S. prided itself as the arsenal of democracy, unmatched in innovation and reliability. Canada's break chipped away at that identity. Other allies took note. If Canada could walk away, what stopped India, Brazil, or Middle Eastern nations from using the same leverage? America's aura of inevitability was cracking. Despite the shock, Washington still holds cards. U.S. defense technology, stealth, avionics, weapons integration remains unmatched. But technology alone won't save contracts. The choice is political. Roll back tariffs, stabilize alliances, and restore predictability, or watch diversification accelerate. Allies don't just want hardware. They want stability, trust, and long-term reliability. Inside the Pentagon, frustration is boiling. Officials had warned that trade wars would drive allies away. Those warnings were ignored. Now, the costs are real and measured not only in dollars, but in trust. Canada's decision will be remembered as a turning point. For the first time in decades, America's closest ally chose to walk away from U.S. fighters. And in doing so, Ottawa proved that Washington's dominance could be contested. The ripple effects stretch across economies, politics, and global strategy. Tens of thousands of jobs are at risk, billions in contracts evaporate. And perhaps most damaging of all, America's reputation as the default leader in defense is under siege. So the question remains, if even Canada won't buy American, what happens when the rest of the world follows? Drop your thoughts below because this story is far from over.